Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Peggy Lane. I'm Director of Advanced VT and Faculty Projects at Virginia Tech, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session, the second session in the Women in Naval Engineering track today. And I want to thank Jennifer Lynn and her committee for organizing the track, and I want to thank my colleague Lee McHugh at Virginia Tech for inviting me to participate. So this afternoon, we're going to share with you some statistics about women in engineering to give you a baseline of information. And then our speaker is going to present a summary of research on women in engineering, women in science, engineering, technology, and math, starting in the early education stages and carrying through to the workplace. So I'm going to invite my co-moderator, Kathleen Kane, to give us some background information.
All right. So what we're trying to do today is introduce a little interactive portion to this. So you probably saw scrolling in when you came, we have 5 questions about statistics that we're hoping everyone can, during the presentation at some point, go onto this polling site on their mobile device and make their guesses for these questions, and then we'll reveal the answers after the speaker. So the first question we had was the percentage of degrees in engineering awarded to women has been steadily increasing since the 1950s, and we're looking for a response of whether that's true or false. The second question was approximately what percentage of the engineering workforce is female? Giving options of 0%, 10%, 25%, 30%, or 38%. The third question is, what is the pay gap in the median annual salary between male and female engineers based on comparable levels of education? And the options for that are 0, 2,000, 6,000, 8,000, and 12,000. And question 4 is, which sector of employment has the highest proportion of women among its engineering workforce? The options are business or industry, federal government, nonprofit, state or local government, and universities or four-year colleges. And then as a follow-up to that one, question 5, which sector of industry employs the largest percentage of female engineers? So this is the percentage of female engineers in that specific sector, as opposed to question 4, which is which sector has the most. So if you have a moment to do that, I'll come up with the polling results after we have our speaker.
All right, thank you. So you have the opportunity to select your answer on your mobile device, and we'll give you your grade at the end of the session. Now I'm going to introduce our speaker, Christy Corbett, who's a senior researcher at the American Association of University Women, where she specializes in gender equity issues in education and the workplace. She is a frequently cited speaker on women in STEM and the co-author of many AAUW reports, including the one that she's going to be talking about today, which is called Why So Few? Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And she was kind enough to bring a few executive summaries of the report, which are up here at the end of the speakers table, so you can pick up a copy after the session as long as they last. Before joining AAUW, Christy also worked on the Hill and as a mechanical design engineer in the aerospace industry. She's both an anthropologist and an engineer. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Kathleen and Jennifer, for inviting me here today. I'm really happy to be here today with you to share some of the findings from AAUW's report, Why So Few? Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, often called the STEM fields, as you all, I'm sure, know. And for those of you who don't know about AAUW, we're an organization that was founded in 1881 of women who had gone to college. So back then, that was a pretty small group. Not so anymore. And we do research, we do advocacy, we also give a lot of grants and fellowships for graduate women. So before I go into the presentation, I just want to share a little bit about my own journey in engineering. I became interested in engineering in a way that many girls do, through being good at math and liking math. And so I excelled in that. While I was in school, I also was very interested in social sciences. So I had these two competing interests that, as many of you know, when you go through high school, you have to choose. You can't take every class that they offer, as you all know. So I found myself kind of torn, and when I went to college, I majored both in aerospace engineering and in government, and I ended up getting a double degree. The other thing, that's actually kind of a common situation for girls who go into engineering in particular, because for girls who have strong math aptitude, they're also more likely than boys to have strong verbal aptitude as well, which then gives them, it opens up more opportunities in terms of majoring in social sciences or humanities. So that's one of the issues that factors into the question of why so few. Many women with strong aptitude. In fact, there are some interesting studies on they're not called, highly precocious, I think is what they're called, highly precocious kids who get over a 700 on their SAT math in 7th grade. These kids, they've tracked them for decades, and they find that the girls who are identified as these very mathematically capable young people are much more likely to go into social sciences or humanities than the boys. The boys almost all those boys go into science or engineering, but that's not so for the girls. So after I got my engineering degree, I worked for 8 years as a mechanical design engineer in the aerospace industry. And while I was there, I became very interested, actually, in why there were so few women. And so I went back to school and got my master's degree in anthropology, focusing on that. And here at AEW, I've been fortunate enough to work on this topic and to learn that there's actually a lot of people looking into this question. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. And first, I also just want to thank the National Science Foundation for funding this report, as well as AEW members. In particular, there's a giving circle out in California called the Mooney and Lecce Giving Circle, and they gave generously to AEW so that we could do this report. So I'll start with a brief description of where girls and women are in STEM subjects and fields. As you all know, women have made a lot of progress in education and the workplace over the past decades, and this is true in science and engineering as well. High school preparation is a precursor to a career in science or engineering. Historically, boys have outperformed girls in these fields, but the gender gap has narrowed over time, and today girls are doing as well as boys in these subjects by most measures. The chart on the left shows the average high school credits earned in math and science, and girls are in green and boys are in purple. You can see that both girls and boys are taking more credits in math and science over the years, and they're taking about equal numbers. They are taking equal numbers in 2009, the latest year that we have data for. And then on the right is the grade point average. And there you can see also girls they get higher grades on average in their math classes, and that's true for science too. That's just math that's charted there, but it's also true for science. And so again, the grades are increasing for both girls and boys. And as is typical in school, girls do get higher grades than boys. But the result is that nearly equal numbers of girls and boys graduate high school well prepared to go into science or engineering. But in college, far fewer women major in STEM fields, particularly those over on the right, physics, engineering, and computer science, than boys. And these are, so this chart shows the percentage of bachelor's degrees earned by women in selected STEM fields between 1966 and 2010. So as you go from left to right, you can see the change in women's representation in each field from 1966 to 2010. And so looking over here at the left, I don't know if this is a pointer. I don't think it is. Oops. Okay, well, on the left you have the biological and agricultural sciences, where women actually earn the majority of degrees now. And that was not so in the 60s, so there has been a dramatic increase in the biological sciences. In chemistry, women earned half the degrees in 2010. In math, just under half, 43%. And the earth, atmospheric, and ocean science is 39%. But then, as I said, over on the right, those fields, physics, engineering, and computer science, are the areas where women still remain really underrepresented. Another an important piece of information to know is that women now make up 57% of all undergraduates. So the fact that they're 20% and 18% of engineering and physics and computer science is kind of surprising. It's small. And in computer science, you can see that women's representation has been declining for the last few decades. So that's a particular conundrum that lots of people are looking at, what's going on in computer science. This is the labor force. I meant to include all more STEM fields than that, but that's what I included, just math and computer science and engineering. So this is in the labor force. The trend is the same for physicists and chemists as well, and biologists. Biologists, women are about just under half of those in the workforce, and you can see that among mathematical and computer scientists, the percentage of women has increased since 1960 to 2012, and among engineers, it's a pretty direct, it's a pretty straight line up, from 1% in 1960. To 14% in 2012. So that's a really big increase. And yet 14% is still really small. So that's kind of that's the question again, is what's going on. So I wanted to present this just to break the data down a little bit further to show the percentage of women in selected, specifically engineering and computing professions in 2011. The field of ocean or marine engineering was so small that I wasn't able to find data showing the representation of women in it, but I suspect that it's similar to mechanical or aerospace or electrical, which are on the far right end, where you have the smallest percentage of women. Mechanical is about 6%, electrical about 8%, and aerospace around 12%. So that's where I suspect women in naval engineering are. So the purpose of this report, Why So Few, is to present recent research findings that help explain why so few girls aspire to these science and engineering careers and why relatively few women stay in them. The findings were chosen specifically because they have potential to change the way people understand this problem. They're well-respected, peer-reviewed findings, and they have practical applications. And while the report is focused on girls and women, these findings also do have particular relevance for all underrepresented minorities in engineering. So we based this report on interviews with the top researchers and a review of the large body of academic literature on gender and science. And so we present in-depth descriptions of the research findings that are on the nurture side of the nature-nurture debate. And each of the findings shows that social and environmental factors clearly do make a difference in the numbers of women in these fields. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 6 of the findings that we talk about in the report. The first finding that I'll talk about comes from the research of Dr. Carol Dweck, who's a psychologist at Stanford University, and she looks at beliefs about intelligence. Dr. Dweck's research shows that believing in the potential for intellectual growth in and of itself improves outcomes. Dr. Dweck's research provides evidence that what she calls a growth mindset, as opposed to a fixed mindset, benefits girls in math and science. And the table shown here lays out the differences between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Oh, thank you. Individuals with a fixed mindset believe that intelligence is static, so that it's something that you're born with. Whereas individuals with a growth mindset believe that your intelligence can be developed and it can grow the more that you learn. Those with a fixed mindset are susceptible to a loss of confidence when they encounter challenges because they believe that if they're truly smart at something, it should come easily to them. And if they have to work hard at something, they tend to question their abilities and they're likely to give up. Individuals with the growth mindset, on the other hand, show a far greater belief in the power of effort. And in the face of difficulty, their confidence can actually grow because they think that they're getting smarter by challenging themselves. And Dr. Dweck's research was conducted mainly on middle school students. And it shows that when students were taught that their intelligence can expand with experience and learning, that they actually did better on math tests. And they're more likely to say that they want to pursue more math in the future. So not only does she showed in her studies about half the people fell into the fixed mindset camp and about half into the growth mindset camp. And she was able to show that an intervention was able to turn that around, to change a fixed mindset into a growth mindset. So these findings are important for girls and women in science and engineering for two reasons. First, because encountering obstacles and challenging problems is really in the nature of science and engineering work. It's about solving difficult problems. And so when girls and women believe they have a fixed amount of intelligence, they're more likely to lose confidence and disengage from science and engineering when they inevitably encounter difficulties in their coursework or later in their careers. Now that's true for men as well, if they have a fixed mindset. The growth, and so while a growth mindset benefits everybody, it's particularly relevant for girls in math and science because negative stereotypes do persist about girls' abilities in these areas. And what Dr. Dweck's research shows is that a growth mindset can actually protect girls from this harmful stereotype, from the harmful effects of stereotypes. So, and it's interesting because her research also shows that a fixed mindset can also be beneficial to people for a while. If you think you have a fixed amount of intelligence, but you have a lot of mathematical ability, it can actually be a boost. You know, it can give you self-confidence, and you can think, I'm good at this. I was born with this, and I'm good at it, which can be helpful to a point. But once you get to a point where you can't solve the problems easily, it can become a detriment. So there are a number of steps that we can take to foster a growth mindset in students and in adults as well. One of them is the focus on children is to teach children that intellectual skills can be acquired. So teaching, the intervention that Dr. Dweck and her colleagues did was basically teaching kids that the brain is like a muscle and that as you exercise it, it grows and you become smarter. So they went through like a 6-week session of this, once a week. They got this message that as you exercise your brain, as you try things that are really hard, your brain gets strong, gets bigger, gets stronger, and you're able to do more. So that's, teaching children that that's the case can cultivate a growth mindset. And a second thing is to praise effort rather than intelligence or talent. And that's something, so rather than saying to kids, you're so smart, saying, wow, you worked really hard at that. I really admire how persistent you were. Things like that can really encourage persistence in difficult problems and not encourage this idea that somebody's smart or not smart. Even the title gifted, for like gifted programs, it conveys a bit of a fixed mindset, doesn't it? Because it's really about somebody being given something that's not something that they've developed themselves. So just praising kids for effort, and it's something that I've developed with my own kids. It wasn't something that came naturally, but I was able to, my initial reaction when they would do something quickly was to say, oh, you're so smart. But I've completely stricken it from my vocabulary, as I think a lot of parents have now, because Dr. Dweck's research has kind of gotten into the, I don't know if it's the mainstream, but into a lot of parenting literature now. And even in, I saw that the chart that's in Why So Few with the fixed and the growth mindset in the middle school, actually, and I live in Tacoma Park. So in the Tacoma Park Middle School, there's a big poster of it. So it's something that is kind of getting into the mainstream. And in fact, there was a session at the White House maybe 6 months ago where Carol Dweck came and many of the other researchers working on this, because they're really trying to somehow get this idea or kind of how to cultivate a growth mindset into the mainstream of public education, because it is really, the findings are really compelling. The next finding that I want to talk to you about, this is not what I was going to talk about. Let's see. This is the one I want to talk about. Okay, so the next one is about gender differences in self-assessment in math and science. The last The last finding was about stereotype threat, and it's a finding that we cover in YSOFU. This finding kind of relates to it, so I'm not presenting both, but you could definitely read about it in YSOFU. I'm going to give you the URL for the PDF, and you can always get it if you want to read about it. This finding is about gender differences in self-assessment in math and science. And this is research by Dr. Shelley Carell, who's a sociologist also at Stanford University. And she first became interested in gender differences in self-assessment when she taught chemistry to high school students before becoming a sociologist. And as a high school chemistry teacher, she noticed that no matter how well the girls in her classes did, she had trouble convincing them that they really had aptitude for chemistry. And at the same time, she found that no matter how poorly the boys in her classes did, they continued to believe that they were very good at chemistry. And so that was something that stuck in her mind once she went to graduate school. And she delved into the issue. She looked at a data set of more than 16,000 high school students and found that among students with similar past math achievement in terms of grades and test scores, the girls assessed their mathematical abilities lower than the boys did. So she decided to test this finding in an experimental setting to make sure that that it was something, that there was something real about it, that it was, because she said that she would talk about this finding and people would say, well, the boys really were better at math and science, it just wasn't reflected in their math scores, in their grades and their test scores, and she thought, well, I'm not sure that's what's going on. So she devised an experiment. And here's an example from the experiment. So see if you can answer the question, does this rectangle have more black or more white? Does anybody want to guess? Yes?
I'm going to say that it has equal amounts.
That's right. Yes. So that's right. So in Dr. Carell's experiment, she identified a fictitious ability to detect correct proportions of black and white as what she called contrast sensitivity ability. And half the participants were told that men had more contrast sensitivity ability on average than women, and half were told that there were no gender differences in contrast sensitivity ability. And participants were asked to answer 20 questions like this with equal amounts of black and white. And they had to say black or white. It was the majority of the picture. And then each of them was told that they got 12 out of 20 correct. So despite being told that they scored the same, among participants told that men were better at contrast sensitivity ability, this is men are better at this task, the men assessed their abilities significantly higher than women did. And among the group told there's no gender difference in performing this task, they assessed their abilities very equally. And women are shown in green and men in purple in this chart. In the same experiment, participants were asked, how high would you have to score to be convinced that you have high task ability at this made-up task? And these results are shown here. Again, women are in green and men are in purple. So in the group where participants were told that men are better at this task, women indicated that they would have to earn at least 89% to think that they were good at it. On the other hand, men thought that a score of 79% would indicate high ability. So that's a difference of 10 percentage points right there. And here in the group told there's no gender difference in performing this task, there was no significant gender difference in how high the standard that men and women set for themselves in terms of thinking that they were good at it. So if you think about this finding as it relates to engineering, a field in which men are considered to excel, it suggests that girls believe that they have to be better in engineering and all the math and science and engineering classes that go into becoming an engineer than boys believe they have to be in order to think of themselves as good engineering students or good engineers. And there are many elements to choosing a career, but researchers do agree that one element is believing that you can do it and you can be successful at it. So first, girls' lower self-assessment of their abilities, as was shown here, in what are considered to be fields where men are better, more successful, combined with this higher standard that they hold for themselves can really help us understand why fewer women, girls and women, aspire to these careers, because they think, I'm not that good at it, and I have to be really good to be successful. So we make a few recommendations that come out of Dr. Carell's research. One is to set clear performance standards, and what that does is it actually reduces reliance on stereotypes by making the standards clear. So those of you who went to engineering school might remember that Sometimes there were very low scores in classes. The average test score might be 50%. And that kind of thing, it actually, what it does is it increases uncertainty in everybody. Every student is like, what? I'm getting a 40 out of 100? I don't know what I'm doing. But it increases uncertainty more among people who already have a sense that they might not be in the right place. And that often includes women because there aren't many other women. The same is true for underrepresented minorities, that they might feel like, oh, this is, maybe this isn't for me. So being clear about the performance standards can help. It helps people not rely on their own stereotypes. Which we all have, because we live in a society where there are not many women in these fields. So we're apt to think that this is, what's the reason for that? There might be some reason why women should not be in these fields. And so being clear, like a professor saying, you did just what I expected. 60%, if you're getting 60% on this test, you're doing great. Things like that. Being clear as opposed to just letting people think, I don't know if I'm in the right place, can help. And then a second one is to help girls and young women recognize their career relevant skills. So girls are less likely than boys to make the connection between their academic success in math and science in high school or in grade school or in college to the likelihood that they'll be a successful engineer or computer scientist or whatever kind of STEM professional. So making that connection for them, saying, wow, if you can do this well in physics, you could be a civil engineer easily. Something like that, just making those connections for kids can really help. Another thing that Dr. Carell's research showed is that girls who take calculus in high school are 3 times as likely as girls who don't to major in a STEM field, and that number was not so great for boys. So so that's something else, to encourage kids to take as much math and science as they can when they're in high school. Just because even if they don't want to go into those fields, at least they'll have the option when they get to college. The next finding is in the area of spatial skills learning, and it describes research that shows that spatial skills can relatively easily be learned with training. So one of the largest gender differences in abilities is found in the area of spatial skills, particularly the area of mental rotation, where boys and men consistently outperform girls and women. And this is an example of mental rotation. Does anybody want to volunteer the answer to this question? What? D? Yes. Okay. Can you see the picture? So as the top is rotated to this, when this is rotated in the same way, what does it look like? And yes, D, that's correct. So that's the right answer. So spatial skills are considered by many people to be innate and also important for success in engineering and scientific fields. But over a decade of research conducted by Dr. Cheryl Sorby with first-year engineering students at Michigan Tech shows that individual spatial skills are not fixed and they consistently improve dramatically in a short time with a simple training course. So Dr. Sorby found that when college students who failed a test like this, a spatial visualization test, when they took a 10-week training course that met just 4 hours a week, their scores improved from an average of 52% at the beginning of the course to 82% at the end. And it's a much bigger improvement than you would get from just taking the test a second time or even from taking an engineering graphics course. So she developed this course that can really teach spatial visualization. And she was later able to achieve the same results in an even shorter time with 28 hours total of training. And in addition, Dr. Sorby has some striking findings on spatial skills and retention of female engineering students. So she found that among the women who initially failed the test and took her course between 1993 and 1998, 77% persisted in engineering. And in comparison, only 48% of the women who had initially failed the test and did not take her course persisted in engineering over the same time frame. Now it's not a random sample because these young women opted into her course, so it's possible that they were more likely to succeed anyway. But her results are compelling enough that they've decided at Michigan Tech to make her course mandatory for anybody who fails the spatial visualization test when they come into the engineering program. And so soon she'll have this kind of random data that she'll be able where she'll be able to assess, what is the real effect of that course in terms of retention of women. So, And another thing that Dr. Sorby emphasizes is that having good spatial skills is important even from early on in terms of interpreting diagrams in science classes in elementary school. So it's an important skill to have. And what she also said is that a lot of her fellow engineering professors also believed that these skills were innate, just because probably they develop these skills early on, and so it's hard to know how you develop a skill. And so many of her colleagues just felt like it was sort of a lost cause to try to develop these skills in people, but that's not the case. So one of the recommendations that comes out of Dr. Sorby's research is to encourage children to play with building toys, such as Legos or erector sets. There's lots of things on the market. I actually have 2 boys, so I'm very familiar with building toys because they play with them all the time. But this has been shown. The people in her studies, people who had experience with putting together these kinds of toys as kids had better spatial skills later on. The same was true for those who took mechanical drawing classes, who had mechanical drawing classes. They improved. So. And the second recommendation we make is to use handheld models wherever possible. That's kind of for educators. So rather than using computer models to actually let people hold the things, let students put things in their hands, what can actually improve spatial skills. And a number of other universities have developed Dr. Sorby's course, or have implemented it as well. And there's actually she has a workbook that's available on Amazon.com for anybody who's interested in developing their spatial skills. They're just all kinds of worksheets. So the next finding I want to talk about has to do with colleges and universities. So while the foundation for becoming an engineer is laid early in life, scientists and engineers are really created in universities and colleges. I want to talk a little bit about the college student experience and some small changes that science and engineering departments can make to improve recruitment and retention of women. So this chart shows the percentage of first-year college students to major in science and engineering fields in 2010. So these are incoming freshmen. And so you can see that just under 1 out of 5 women start college intending to major in some sort of science or engineering. It's 35% of men do. Among the women who do go to college intending to major in a STEM field, most of them are intending to major in biology. That's the blue. And then, but for men, look at engineering is the green. Engineering is a pretty popular major for young men to intend when they start college. About 15% of boys who start college are planning to become engineers. That number is about 5% for women. And look at computer science is similarly really different for boys and girls, although it's a much smaller field, which is an important point as well, because people talk a lot about computer science. It's very important, the gender difference, but engineering is a much bigger field. It affects many more people. So women are less likely to go to college with the intention of pursuing a STEM field, but that doesn't necessarily mean that colleges and universities are off the hook. 2 different research projects that we describe in the report show that small changes can improve the climate of STEM departments. And we first describe research by Dr. Barbara Witten, who's a physicist, and she's a physicist at Colorado College, and she compares what she calls successful physics programs with more typical physics programs. And the successful ones are the ones that graduate 40% or more of their students are women who they graduate. Typical, more about 20%. And then a second research project took place at Carnegie Mellon. Drs. Jane Margolis and Alan Fisher, they worked with the computer science department at Carnegie Mellon, where they managed to increase the percentage of women coming into computer science from 7% to 42% over 5 years. So both of these projects found that just small differences in recruitment, admissions, and the curriculum really helped to improve the climate and to attract and keep female students. So what are some of these changes? One is to actively recruit female students. This may seem obvious, but many departments don't do that. They just choose from among the applicants. And second, departments can offer introductory courses that show students the variety of real-world applications of the field and that don't just focus on technical aspects. It's been, this approach has been found to be effective not only for attracting women, but for attracting men as well. But especially for women. And I remember when I began studying engineering, I told my advisor that I'd like to take a course like this so that I could decide which type of engineering would be the best fit for me. And I was told that there wasn't a course like that the first course that all engineers took was a computer programming course. It was Fortran 77, and I took it, and I learned how to program in Fortran 77, and I really liked it. So I went on to, but then I was still kind of left with trying to figure out what kind of engineering should I major in, and there was no way to get just a real sense of what am I going to do with this degree? What are my options? So doing, and I know actually now that my alma mater has implemented a course, has put in place a course like this where you get to see what are the different applications of the different types of engineering, and a lot of other schools have done that as well. So that's an important thing that people can do. And another is to consider prerequisites carefully. So this comes out of the Carnegie Mellon study. Admissions policies that require experience that will be taught in the curriculum may weed out potentially successful students. So at Carnegie Mellon, they'd been giving preference to computer science major applicants who had significant prior experience with computer programming. And they realized that by doing this, they were weeding out people who were less likely to have this experience in computer programming, like women and underrepresented minorities. And since they were planning to teach computer programming skills, they realized they were able to change their requirements in such a way that they did not prioritize prior experience. And in that way, they were able to get more applicants, or get more women, and get more underrepresented minorities as well. So thinking carefully about, it's harder, of course, to come up with those criteria that are not directly related to what you're going to teach, but if you're going to be teaching it anyway, really looking for applicants who exhibit good critical thinking skills and can actually just help you diversify your class. Okay, this is another finding in the report that I did not intend to put in this presentation. It's about STEM, it's about faculty, and about the sense of fit. Again, it's in the report, but I'm not going to go into I'm not going to talk about it too much, just because it's not as relevant to you all. The next one is about implicit or unconscious bias. This is research by Dr. Mahzarin Banaji and her colleagues at Harvard University, which finds that people associate science and math fields with male more readily than they do with female. She's the co-founder of the implicit association test, which anybody can take to learn about their own biases. It's available online, and it's free to take, and it's anonymous. And since it was established in 1998, more than 500,000 people from around the world have taken it. And more than 70% of the test takers more readily associated male with science and female with arts than the reverse, which may not seem that surprising, but it's true even among people who express no conscious belief that this is the case, that men are better at science. And it's also it's really important research because it's a way to get at what's going on underneath our filter, basically, like what we consciously believe, to kind of tap into what's going on unconsciously. And what they find is that this implicit bias is common, even among individuals who consciously reject negative gender stereotypes. And I can give you an example of my own implicit bias, which I discovered while working as an engineer. I remember one time being on the phone with somebody from a heater company, and I needed some information. I was designing telescopes, or radiators for a space telescope, and I needed technical information, and there was a woman on the phone, and I found myself feeling very agitated because I needed the information quickly, and I found myself thinking, I wish she would just put the guy on the phone who can give me the information, because she's not going to be able to do it. And so what this story exhibits is that what all the studies show, that implicit bias is not only true for men. Women also have this implicit bias that favors men in these fields, in these technical fields. And also it exhibits, or it illustrates that it doesn't matter what you consciously believe, because there's no way I would have said that I thought women were not as good at engineering. But I behaved in a way that suggested that probably somewhere I did have that belief. So there are actually, figuring out what to do about this is kind of, that's actually where the research is. That's sort of like the frontier. There are lots of researchers trying to figure out, what do we do about implicit bias? Now that we know that most people have it, how do we combat it? And there are some studies that are promising, but there's not many studies that show long-term difference, mainly because people haven't studied the long-term effects of these interventions. So we're hoping that soon there will be good evidence for, what can we really do about these implicit biases. But the first step is to really just learn about your unconscious bias, because if you don't know about it, then there's nothing you can do. But this is the URL, or if you just, implicit.harvard.edu, if you just type that in, you will get to there's many implicit tests actually. You select the gender science one, and it takes about 10 minutes, and you'll get your score, and you'll find out if you have bias that favors men in science. Recently, actually, I took it again, and I didn't have a bias that favored men. But so I was really pleased about that. But for a long time, I did. For many, even after working as an engineer and studying as an engineer. So that's one. And then second is to, if you find that you have biases, you can take steps. There are some steps to address them. Dr. Mahzarin Banaji says that she, puts up images of women in non-traditional occupations in her office and in her home, so that she's, that seeing different images can actually make a difference. So that's one step that you can take. Learning about women in non-traditional occupations can help to reset your biases. But like I said, there's nothing that's really compelling yet to how to go about changing it. So a lot of researchers are thinking, maybe we can't change our implicit biases. Maybe what we have to do is just put into place systems as much as possible that where our implicit biases won't come into play. So for example, when you're reviewing applications for a job, you don't look at the gender of somebody. Things like that, to kind of like just put yourself in a situation where your biases won't come into play. And the final research finding that I want to talk about today shows not only that are people more likely to associate math and science with men than with women, but they often hold negative opinions of women in quote-unquote masculine positions, like scientists or engineers. And this is research by Dr. Madeline Heilman at New York University, and it shows that people judge women to be less competent than men in what are considered to be male jobs, unless the women are clearly successful in their work. Then they're not judged to be less competent. But in that case, when a woman is clearly competent in what is considered to be a masculine job, she's then considered to be less likable. So obviously both likability and competence are necessary for success in the workplace. And so this can be a really difficult kind of a double bind for women in fields that are non-traditional for women. So her findings are represented here in this chart. The women, again, are shown in green, and the men are shown in purple. So if you look at the left side of the chart, you'll see that participants rated men and women employees who were described as successful at male-type work as nearly equally competent. When it wasn't clear how successful the employees were, though, participants judged men to be more competent. And the right side of the chart shows how participants rated employees' likability. When employees' performance was ambiguous, you didn't know how they did, men and women were judged to be about equally likable. But when employees were described to be successful, women were judged by people to be significantly less likable. So what can we do about this? Again, raising awareness about bias against women in these fields is the first step. So once men and women in these fields are aware that bias exists, they can work to interrupt these unconscious thought processes that lead to bias. And for women in particular, knowing that this bias is out there can help them understand that if they encounter social disapproval in their role, it may not be personal. And then second, again, creating clear criteria for success. The more employers can clarify their performance standards and the requirements for hiring and promotion, the less people will fall back on stereotypes to make judgments. And as her research shows, when the criteria are vague or there are no objective measures of performance, people tend to judge women to be less capable. So one other finding of Dr. Heilman's that she urged us not to emphasize too much in the report because it can backfire, was that when women are seen as competent, when they are competent in a male, what is considered to be a male field, and they're encountering dislike, they can actually counteract that by showing evidence of being nurturing, which is, but it can backfire. If you show that you're nurturing before you're seen as competent, it can actually make you seem less competent. So it's something that she didn't want us to emphasize too much, but for those of you here who feel like you're already seen as competent, but you may be running into obstacles, feeling like for some reason I'm not being accepted, even just showing evidence that you're a mother can actually, it actually was shown to decrease the dislike that was targeted toward these women who were in masculine fields. It's a crazy thing, and it's a stopgap measure, but hopefully things will be changing as we get more and more women into these fields. So basically, I've given you a brief look at some of the findings in the report, and each of the studies is just a few pages long. If you're interested in reading more, I urge you to go to the website, auw.org/research/why so few, or if you just Google why so few, it will come up. And like I said, there's executive summaries there. And so in closing, I've talked about a number of obstacles that girls and women face in these fields, but I hope that what sticks with you from the talk are some of the positive messages of what we can do to counteract these obstacles and open up these fields more fully to women. One thing is to praise children for their effort more than for their intelligence or their talent. Another thing that we can do is help girls make the connection between their good grades and the possibility of becoming some sort of scientist or engineer. And a third thing that we can do in our workplaces is to do that hard work of clarifying and making transparent the requirements for a position and for a promotion so that our unconscious biases don't get in the way of us making the best decisions we can make. And finally, the research shows that seeing women in these professions lessens the power of the stereotype that still exists in our society that science and engineering is really men's work. So for those of you women in the audience who are women in engineering, I urge you to think about how you can become, be a role model for girls and show them, what you're doing. So thanks so much for being such an attentive audience.
Thank you, Christy, and we are going to have time for questions at the end, but I think next Kathleen's going to review the answers to the questions that we showed you earlier.
I realized when I spoke before I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Kathleen Kane, a 2007 graduate of Webb Institute, and the project engineer for future amphibious ships and PEO ships at NAVC. So I have the results. We didn't have a lot of people who were able to participate, but I will share the answers. Actually, only question number 3, did anyone vote for the correct answer? So this should be interesting. So question number 1 was the percentage of degrees in engineering awarded to women has been steadily increasing since the 1950s. Our options are true or false. The true was what was selected most often, but the correct answer is actually false. There's been a small decrease in the degrees awarded in the the end of the last decade. So to 2010, the degrees actually decreased from 2005. It's only slight kind of leveling off now. And then question number 2. The most popular response was C, 25%. And actually, this is a little bit of a trick because the real answer isn't any of these numbers. It's actually 12.75%, which is closest to B, 10%. So this just looks at all engineering occupations. This is a lot of what Christy actually got into in her presentation, where she had the different fields and how some of them were much more represented than others. Question 3, this is the one that the guesses came in correctly at E, $12,000. What is the pay gap and median annual salary between male and female engineers? You can see it here for all degrees, that's the $12,000 difference. And you see how the differences increase with the level of education. So it's actually a much smaller discrepancy with a bachelor's degree than the later career master's and doctorate levels. Question number 4, which employment sector has the highest proportion of women among its engineering workforce? So this is the sector that their specific population employs the most women, and the most common answer to that was A, business and industry, but the correct answer is actually D, state and local government, although you can see the percentages are all relatively similar, with business industry being 12% and state and local government only being 16%. So there's not really much difference between the different sectors. And the final question, which looked at the entire engineering workforce and which industry employs the large percentage of female engineers and of the total population. And the answer for that, the guess was B, but the actual answer is A, business and industry. But business and industry actually employs the most engineers overall. It's about 75%, both men and women work in business or industry. It's just the largest sector. And that's it. So I'm going to pass it back to Peggy to do our resume activity.
Thanks. I hope those statistics have given you all a little bit of food for thought. And some additional food for thought, we're just going to do a brief exercise to illustrate some of the concepts that Christy was talking about, dealing with implicit bias and evaluations of competence and likability. I'm going to show you some information about the accomplishments of 2 different individuals and then ask you some questions about them. So individual A has a degree from Stanford, co-founded a software company, worked at Apple Computer, managing director at a venture capital firm, and some descriptions of this individual are a proficient networker, a catalyst, and a captain of industry. Individual B has a degree from UCLA and worked as an elementary school teacher and is described as tireless, joyfully creative, and energetic. So which of the individuals described in these resumes do you think goes by the name of Heidi? Given the topic of this session, you can probably guess that it is individual A. I think I have, some more information about Heidi and Rafe there. And this example illustrates a Harvard Business School case study where students were asked to evaluate individuals based on their resumes without names attached and to describe them as whether you would describe them as likable, whether you would describe them as competent, and what you expect their gender to be. So as Christy mentioned in her wrap-up, some steps that you can take individually and in your workplace with your colleagues to help to address the unconscious biases that we all have are to educate yourself and your colleagues, to develop clear criteria for decisions, making sure that those criteria are relevant for the performance that you're trying to fill, and make sure that you're evaluating candidates in conjunction with those criteria and not with criteria that are not relevant for the position you're trying to fill. And to hold yourself and your colleagues accountable for the decisions that you make, and be as transparent as possible in spelling out what the criteria are for advancement, for selection, for different types of projects. And to support women in the workplace, your colleagues, your subordinates, your superiors. And we have plenty of time for questions. I'll start here.
I'll go the microphone?
Yes, please do go to the microphone. We are
Is that what we're
recording the
doing?
session, so thank you very much. And introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, I will. My name is Lieutenant Lillian Butterworth. I'm in the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard's Naval Engineering, Naval Engineering, and just gonna raise this up. I'm a tall person. The Coast Guard Naval Engineering branch, specifically the Long Range Enforcer product line. So I manage emergency maintenance projects on the largest ships in the Coast Guard. Our product lines are kind of divided between the different sizes of the vessels. And my question goes back to something that Ms. Corbett was saying, kind of at the beginning of your presentation, when you were talking about when girls and boys are still in middle school and high school, and their abilities are being assessed by standardized testing such as the SAT scores, and you were talking about how girls who score higher in math also seem to correlate with higher verbal skills, so they may also end up going into the humanities and the arts as well. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so one of my questions was, and I agree with everything that you said in your presentation, having gone through that myself in middle school and high school, and also being in an engineering field that was predominantly male throughout the last 10 years of my life. But a thought that I had when you said that was, because it seems, I guess, could you assume that because women also are just as likely to go into the arts and humanities as they are science and STEM related fields, do you think that one reason why we're not seeing as high percentages of women in STEM is because they have maybe other options that maybe men don't have? Like maybe they're like, oh, well, I could go into engineering, but I also really like art. I like English. It's just as fun, and I kind of want to do that more. So maybe it's not just a factor of them thinking, oh, well, I'm not really smart enough to go into sciences, but I want to do something else more. Was there any research to support that?
No, yeah, I think that's probably how most women experience it. Who decide not to go into math and science and decide to go into something else, is that they just like it more. And certainly there is that's the situation for them. But when you look at it sort of broadly, the fact that there are these researchers that show that all this research that shows implicit bias exists, you have to factor that in, that we're all influenced by this, by kind of like what we see around us.
Oh yeah,
and
I failed the resume test.
Yeah, right. So it's not like any of us make our decisions about what we're going to do sort of in a vacuum, or just based on our any sort of objective criteria. We're basing it on what we like, but how do our interests develop is a question. If you don't see any women doing the type of work that you're kind of interested in, but you see others, women doing things that you're also kind of interested in, then you might go for that. You might go for the thing that you can see other people like yourself doing. But a lot of people do think that the sciences and engineering they could do a better job really of packaging what you do as a scientist or engineer that would be more appealing to women and to many people. If you can talk more about the social relevance of the work, for example, that's something that more girls and women say that they care about. There's lots of men who also care about
absolutely.
that, happily. But women are more likely to care about that. And engineering doesn't necessarily, it's not portrayed that way. That's not necessarily what's emphasized about, you can become an engineer and you can change the world. But some groups are trying to change that message, to make that the message. So I think so yes. I mean, I think that women, I think that's kind of why there are a number of people who say, what's the problem? Everything's equal. We don't need to be worrying about this problem anymore. Women have as many opportunities as men they're not choosing to go into it, so let's let it go. But the reality is what comes into making people make choices is our culture. Our culture influences our choices.
Yeah, we were just saying earlier on the break when we were talking about it, me and my fellow lieutenants here, that it could be perhaps that the engineering doesn't always lend itself as much to those social projects.
Yeah.
That women like. And I know that I feel that same way too. I love talking and meeting and doing all that sort of thing. So yes, I totally agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some projects like Engineers Without Borders, some programs like that have been more successful at attracting women. And fields like biomedical engineering tend to get higher percentages of women because there is a clear social contribution in that field or with those programs. So that's something that can help. And I mean, when you think about too, just kind of the direction that engineering goes, if you don't have many women in it, then it's mostly men who are deciding which problems we're going to be addressing and what we're going to be developing. So, as we get more women into the field, it's possible that it'll just become bigger. The problems we're addressing will just become broader.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Thank you. Dr. Chris McKesson, University of New Orleans. Like many of the educators at the university level, I've actually spent my career as an engineer, not a developmental psychologist. Was very interested in, however, the psychological aspects that you spoke of. I particularly picked up on the fixed versus growth mindset, and I can see how even at the university level we can help encourage the growth mindset. At the university level, what can particularly the male faculty do to support and encourage the female faculty? Because that will become the role model for our female students. Mm-hmm. And a similar question on the same line, I like the implicit bias test. Do you know of any tests that can be administered to the organization to see if we're participating in an organization that demonstrates an implicit bias on it? Mm. And by the way, I downloaded the report, so feel free to say the answers in the textbook. Go read the book.
Okay. Thank you. Well, there is a chapter on faculty that you can read, but in general, it's just kind of one factor that comes into play for female faculty in STEM fields is isolation, and that's what the studies on women in these fields is that a lot of these women just feel pretty alone and not necessarily not supported. So, encourage socializing with them, talking about research, or about your research, about their research, things like that can help. Another recommendation that comes out of it's the coach program at Harvard. That's the one that we talked about for in Why So Few. They talk about mentoring, how mentoring is very important for junior faculty, and there's no evidence that that women are better mentors for women. Men can be equally, good at it. So that's something else to be a mentor for female faculty.
I have to say that's interesting because I remember in our undergraduate days, class of '79, the women in our class, all three of them, and Diane can probably vouch for the fact that they had plenty of attempts for the young men in class to socialize with them. So since we're all still recovering from that, and I suspect we kind of don't go socialize with our female colleagues just to prove that we've grown up a little bit since those days.
Yeah. Well, I think that actually does come into play in terms of just, I think that, just as my own personal experience working as an engineer, I was young, single at the time when I worked as an engineer. Most of my colleagues were men who were married and older, and I think it did make a difference because I don't think that it was not in any ill intent, but they didn't want anything to appear, at all like about everything to be above board. So they would never ask me to go to lunch, for example. That wouldn't happen. Things. So, but that kind of dynamic can create isolation among women when there aren't many women in a field. So just being friendly, being friendly. That's it. No ulterior motives. That can be helpful.
So the program that I run at Virginia Tech is designed particularly to increase the number and success of women faculty in the sciences and engineering. And so some of the things that we've focused on in addition to collegiality and positive workplace climate and policies to help facilitate balancing the demands of personal and professional life. Particularly, we've focused on transparency in the promotion and tenure process, recognizing that majority faculty members tend to have access to informal sources of information that women and underrepresented minority faculty members may not have the same kind of access to. So making sure that things like the criteria for evaluation for promotion and tenure are clearly stated and clearly communicated to everybody in the same way is a positive step towards creating an equitable faculty workplace. So, yes, next question.
Tali Kruger, I work for ABS, and I was just want to complete the thoughts about what you mean whenever there's a meaningful empowerment. I read something about not more choices to do something, but also the ability to choose something that goes against the norm. And that's whenever we are choosing, actually, we are safe to choose to become engineers, and I'm naval architect, marine engineer. My question to you is, with all these studies, what I was doing my research to present this morning in the panel, I stumbled into some things that are very compelling or saying something, that all these studies are getting women to the career. Then whenever we are there, you're talking about being there. But then the problem is the retention. Mm-hmm. So what are the efforts, governmental efforts on that regard? Because I'm seeing that we are working in getting there. Mm-hmm. But what it has been proven in European studies that women get there, stay for a little bit, go to leadership positions, and then they leave. And that's called the pipeline
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you're right. The most of the studies are on getting girls into these fields, and it's a lot easier to study students than the workplace. And so there are not as many studies on the workplace. The government actually is doing more. For example, there was an effort at NSF, I think last year, it's all about kind of work-life balance and flexible policies, that kind of thing. So those are some of the things that are being put into place, and companies are doing the same. But yeah, it appears there's actually not very much research on this, on like what is the variable retention for men and women in these fields. But what evidence there is does suggest that women are more likely to leave the workplace in tech or in engineering. And so companies care about it to some degree, at least they say they do, and they do put money into it. But a lot of times I'm actually working on a report focused specifically on the workplace now, trying to get at this, because that's the next question, is kind of what happens after you get there. And a lot of companies say that they care about it, they want to support it, but they are also more likely to put actual money to K through 12 programs, because it's less controversial, it's less difficult than actually addressing their culture, the workplace culture. And so, yes, so I think it is that's a big part of it, is getting employers to look at what kind of environment can they create. And like Peggy was talking about the advanced programs, that's just what they're doing. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about it, because that's about workplace, in academia, about kind of how do you create a culture that retains women in these fields.
So ADVANCE is a National Science Foundation funded program specifically targeting women faculty in science and engineering. The program's been in place since 2000, so 14 years now, and has given several hundred grants focusing on changing the institutions of higher education rather than fixing the women faculty to make them fit in better. And because the program has now been around long enough that outcomes are starting to be published and being shared in the community and broader throughout higher education about ways to make the workplace make a workplace in which both men and women can be successful. So some of that information I'll be talking about tomorrow, and I'm really excited to hear that Christy's looking at some other workplace research, because there really are just a very few publicly available sources of studies on the experiences of women engineers in the workplace. Corporations look at that information, but they don't share that information. Their corporations will do studies of their employees so that they can improve their employee retention, and corporations recognize that it's a bottom line issue. They spend a lot of money hiring good people, training good people, and when those people walk out the door, that's a loss to that organization. So corporations do put money and energy into looking at what they can do to improve the success of their women employees, but they don't typically share that information because it's competitive information. So, one more question.
Yeah, hi, Glenn Sturdivant with NAVC, and a comment and then a question to the point that LT brought up. We've got next door in the auditorium, we've got 45 middle school and high school girls that are here for a STEM education outreach as part of this Women Naval Engineering type session. And we had several presenters talking to them, including Ms. White here from NAVC. And almost to a presenter, the question from the floor was, can you tell me how engineering can help the planet or save the world or help people? So there's something there, and maybe it's just a branding we're missing. We've missed that point to half the population, so something for us to work on. Question is, has there been any work done in other cultures, maybe Europe? Because I think the Middle East and maybe Asia has different issues, but cultural biases. Do we see the same thing in Europe we see in this country on some of those cultural, social biases?
Yeah, well, the numbers are similar in most European countries in terms of the percentage of women. Not exactly the same. Like some countries, like Hungary, actually has like 36% or something of women in Hungary, or engineers in Hungary are women. So it's like, so in some of the Eastern European countries, actually, there are more women in some of these fields. But in terms of the the implicit bias test, it's international. So yes, I mean the biases exist elsewhere as well. I'm sure there are some variation. And one thing I know with Carol Dweck's research, the fixed and growth mindset, she's said that in some Asian countries in particular, there's more of an emphasis on the fixed or on the growth mindset. There's more of a kind of just a culture of believing that when a baby's born, they're sort of like a blank slate, and you encourage them and you encourage them and you encourage them, and you create sort of they become whatever they work to become. But it's not that they're born with a certain amount of intelligence or not, and you see some a lot of achievement in those cultures. So that's one difference there. But yeah, I'm not. Most of what we've looked at is in the U.S. We haven't looked a lot at AUW. We haven't looked a lot outside of the U.S.
Final comment.
Okay, sorry. Thought I'd bring up for this audience. A few months ago, I was driving home and I heard a report on NPR. They were talking about the bottom 10 majors for women being represented, and right on that list of bottom 10 was explicitly naval architecture and marine engineering, which distinguished itself as being down near the bottom of the list. It wasn't the absolute bottom, I can't remember the number, but it was very close to the bottom of the list. So just to reinforce what you said, it's even lower than mechanical. So that's something for all of us to think about as we work on that for the naval architects in the room, and I know there's a number of us. The other comment was just question was the 14% that you showed. I've been looking at Society of Women Engineers numbers and various other numbers, and I've seen this consistent, it seemed like for about 10 years, of 10%, 11, 10, 10, 10, 10.5, 10. Where did that 14 was a surprise to me. I'm wondering what it's based on.
That in the workforce. That's
the national engineering workforce.
Yes, for the national. It's from I believe it's the census.
Did they include a lot of chemical folks that weren't included before, or is it a real uptick
different
in the
sources of data define engineering differently. So if you look at National Science Foundation data, it'll be different from Bureau of Labor Statistics data, from census data, because the definitions do vary. So you have to really look at what it is that you're looking at very carefully.
That's right. Yes, it is. That source was the American Community Survey from the Census Bureau. Yeah. Yes, but like what Peggy said.
Beware the misleading value of numbers. Thank you all very much for coming. We do have one more session in this track tomorrow morning, I believe at 10 a.m., and I hope to see some of you there. Thank you.